Hello, everybody. I hope you all are back in front of your screens because now we are beginning with an interesting panel discussion about ethical practices in an employee employer relationship. And we have Debyani Sinha, who is Senior Director HR at Extria, and Chandrasekhar Yadav, who is Senior Technical Manager at Fidelity International. Nitin Singh, who is Senior HR Business Partner at Stephanie Group as our panelists, and we are looking forward to some insightful discussions around this topic. Before we move on to the discussion, I would like to thank the founding sponsor, Innovation Roots, which is a leading consulting and training service provider, helping organizations to achieve business agility and beyond. It is one of the leaders and pioneers of niche publishing services and well known for content collaboration with global thought leaders, authors, and creators. You can find out more details at www.innovationroots.com. Simple do's and don'ts to join our events, the current events and the future events. Request everybody to join 5 minutes before the start time so you're settled in the setup, and recommended to use high quality speakers or headphones for better sound quality. Please keep your microphones muted and videos disabled during the session as it may cause disturbance to the speaker or the panelist. At any point of the discussion, you have questions for the panel, make use of the chat box and put your questions out there. At the end of the session, the facilitator or moderator will read out your question on your behalf and will get them answered by the panelist as per the time available in the hand. And we request you to share a feedback of the event to improve in the future events as well. We appreciate your cooperation in following these simple steps. And with that, I would like to call upon Debyani, who is going to moderate today's discussion. Debyani, please let us know a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Nupur. Thanks a lot, and good morning, all of you. So myself is Devyani, and I am in HR from last more than 2 decades, working with various organizations, which includes organizations like TCS, Onida Group, Ushacom, NECHCL, NEC, Nuclear Software, and now I'm currently working with as a senior director talent development at Stria. I have worked in various models of HR, modules of HR, and various parts of HR. In fact, I touched upon everything which starts where an employee starts his or her journey, uh, pre onboarding to post exit, which includes all levels of development, coaching, mentoring, and in fact, all the HR sub areas also, which includes hiring, PMS, which is the performance management system, appraisal, succession planning, so on and so forth. Uh, I am a very I can say that I am a very not a very conservative kind of a leader. I love mingling with people, and my main forte is to understand Gen Z, who is the new and the major population in our pyramid these days. My If I talk about what I love to do other than my work, so I am a bit adventurous in terms of I love any kind of adventure sports. The entire family, we are a family of three, we love road travels, we do long road travels, and this is what I am. And I love trying for cuisines, any kind of cuisine. When I say I love trying, I love cooking. So any cuisine which you can talk about, and I am ready to cook it. This is what I am, and I hand it over to Shekhar for him for 2 words, or as a brief intro about him. Shekhar, over to you.
Thank you, Biani, and thank you, Nupur. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're clearly audible.
Okay, thanks. So I work for Fidelity International as of now. I have 18 years of experience in IT, which includes running the global service desk, service management, application ownership, portfolio management. And I think the reason why I was called here is I've been a people manager for 16 plus years now. I think I became a team leader after 18 months of my first job. And since then, I've had managed teams of different sizes, from 5 people to 50 people to 500 people. And I worked across functions. So even though as part of IT, but you see, I worked for large companies, so you'll always have functions like procurement, human resources, who will need some application support. So that automatically gave me the insight into how the business processes operate in let's say finance or procurement or HR. So that has helped me. I'm quite good with policies. I make sure that any new person who comes in, whether HR does the part or not, but I make sure people are aware of what the policies are, and probably we'll discuss that when it comes up. So that's about me. I mean, I can discuss the family life. I share a lot of interests with Devyani, minus the food part. I'm not a foodie. I eat only to live, and not the other way around. I hope that's enough, or do you want me to say more?
Absolutely, Shekhar. So over to Nitin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devyani, and love to hear you, Shekhar. I mean, it's really interesting. Talking about me, I've been holding more than a decade of experience into HR domain, where I have been, predominant dominantly into IT industry, where I was the part of IT product as well as services. So primarily there I was into enterprise gaming and infrastructures. Talking about the role, I have been more into people management, processes, practices, and gamification. And yes, if I go about the passion, then I think driving and exploring the destination is one of my passion, and I always wanted to live my passion. That's all about me. Thank you.
Great, Nitin. Thank you very much for the lovely and interesting brief introduction about you. So the thing which we are going to discuss today, it is a very sensitive topic, I must say, where employee and employer both are involved, as well as we talk about an ethical practices, right? The ethical practices is something which is an area where if we want to debate, we can debate for hours and hours and hours, because the understanding of ethical practices, if we talk about 10 people, maybe other than the basic standards, the definition or the understanding will be different. So we will talk about the must things or the hygiene things in the ethical practices, and we will not go and touch upon the areas which are kind of so-called controversial areas. We will just touch upon the bare minimum, the hygiene factors which an employee in an employee and employee relationship both should follow. So before going into the detail of the what ethical practices, we must first understand that what do we understand by ethical practices. So, what I understand is an ethical behavior is an application of moral practices in a given situation. Very in a nutshell, right? It means to behave according to the moral standards set by self, and in this context, I would say the organization, right? Because we are talking about employee and employer. For example, a few of the ethical practices in workplace can be obeying company rules, effective communication, taking responsibility, accountability, professionalism, trust, and mutual respect to each other. This is what I understand by what do we call as ethical practices. Let me understand from Nitin and Shekhar that what do they understand by ethical practices, and if you can, they can share some examples and perspective of employee and employer in terms of ethical practices. Over to you, Shekhar.
Yeah, so I agree with what you said. Broadly, that's what it is. It is defining what is morally acceptable and then practicing it. It goes both ways. At the organization level, the company needs to make sure that they write clear policies and they apply their own mind and morally acceptable rules while creating or defining any policy or process. From the employee's perspective, the employee must abide by these policies at all times. Again, it is to abide by something, first you must know the rules. So if people are listening, I would suggest and I would advise, wherever you join, whatever organization you join, make sure that you familiarize yourself with all the policies of the organization. Not knowing the law is not an excuse to break the law. That never works in the court of law. Similarly, it never works when you're working for an organization. From the organization's point of view, the organization must be very clear in the communication with the new joiners, with employers, with employees, existing employees, or exiting employees. The organization must make sure that any changes which happen in the policies are communicated efficiently and effectively. And employees at the same time must ensure that any changes which are communicated, you keep yourself abreast with those changes. Otherwise, the breakdown of communication happens, and things fall apart. Again, from the organization's point of view, it is not just the broader management or the leadership which has to make sure, or HR which has to make sure that they are doing what is right. It also comes down to people. Many a times it you will find that the company is very ethical, but the managers are not. Right. So as a people manager, it is absolutely important that you do not do something which your employees emulate later on and then gets you in trouble and get the employees in trouble and get the companies in trouble. So I work for an investment firm. To give you an example, there are account managers who will have access to sensitive market trends and reports. If they start using that information for their personal gain, they have no moral obligation or authority to then not allow their teams or team members to do the same thing. That's just an example that I'm quoting from the finance world, but that can apply across sectors, right? A manager involving in fraud is left with no authority to disallow the team to do the same, and that in the long run eventually will hurt the entire organization and everybody who is part of the organization.
Thank you, Shekhar. Well said. Not knowing the law is not an excuse to break the law, and we must all understand in the corporate world also the same thing, right? Nitin, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, definitely. I won't stretch it much. Nicely, summarized by Shekhar and you. Um, Ethical practices, are implemented by the employer to foster a employee-employer relationship. Now, when we talk about employee-employer relationship, there is a word called reciprocate. Okay, because these are the practices which has to follow holistically and religiously from both the end, right? So my observation here is what is the level of awareness inside the organization pertaining to this ethical practices, right? If I mean, do we have a kind of assessment tool where we try to know how many of the populations are well aware about the ethical practices? Because I am expecting them to follow, and they are also expecting me to follow, but how about the awareness? Am I aware about the expectations? So just to add 4 points, for example, I would say, like one example where a performance issues has been seen in an employee who has been in the organization from past 3 years. The second example I consider, where this maternity privilege was given to the employee. Again, an extension was given looking at the situation and on the caring perspectives, but later repercussion was there. Third example, we talk about toxic culture and the harassment. How about those heavy words, toxic and this harassment words? Then other side, the last example which I would quote, a resignation is there. you know per, Managers try to know the reason. Manager fight a lot, try to manage the expectation the resource has, but later, after implementing all those expectation, again, this resignation happens and employee decided to move on. So these are the four example where I strongly observe that awareness is something which is very very important when we talk about ethical practices in the organization.
Thank you, Nitin. Well covered. What I understood from your point is one of the very, very important point is communication. And when I say awareness, it can be done through various kinds of communication. So whatever practices an organization is following must get communicated or percolated down from top to bottom, right? And at the same time, as Shekhar also touched upon, an area where the organization is ethical, but probably the manager may, or all the managers may or may not be practicing those ethical practices. So communication is again very important to correct those areas, or arrest those gaps which are there from top to middle and middle to bottom. And the most important thing which I think, which all of us as a people managers need to understand, that the way we are behaving, or the way we are treating down the line, today or tomorrow, we should expect the same behavior will come back to us from somebody or else, or somebody or other. Now, touching upon the entire life cycle of an employee, one of the most important and the entry point to an organization is hiring, right? And in the era of great resignation and talent scarcity, which we all are facing in the industry, we feel that, and we see that in reports, in various researches and here and there, and we also experiencing as the experts of our subject matters, that uh, one of not so very ethical practice during the hiring is multiple employments. So as we all are working from home from last 2 years, fully working from home, not coming to office, we do not have any means to check even if somebody is entering into two or three employments together. I would again request my panel to share their views on this. Shekhar, over to
Yeah,
you.
so I'll go first. So, to be honest, I've actually not come across cases personally where people have taken up more than one job at the same time. But I am aware of a couple of companies where they allow multiple employment, not full time, but they allow part-time employment in different time zones, as long as their own work is not suffering. And I think that is fair. That's the company's own choice. But you're right. There are reports, and people, of course, working from home. It is absolutely impossible to validate and verify whether somebody is working for IBM and Accenture at the same time. Uh, I think in large companies, you also have to understand that you don't become productive the day you join. And I think at some band or grade, employees do understand that. So in the long run, it may not be possible to be employed with the two companies or three companies for, let's say, 5 years. But definitely, people must be doing it for the first 6 months, thinking it's a honeymoon period. There'll not be much work, and that is definitely happening. Even though I have not suffered from it, but that's certainly happening. There are also reports that somebody has to do a very manual task, and the same task to be done over and over again. So smart people do figure out a way of using, let's say, robotic process automation to do their work while they are gallivanting anywhere they want to. So, for example, somebody gets a ticket and it has to give only access every time for the same application. They do figure out a way of automating it, and then must be using that as one of the tools of finding another job, which could be giving them. And of course, the motivation is money. There is no other motivation. But people should understand and realize that, you see, at least in India, you have what you call today the UAN, the Universal Account Number for Provident Fund. Someday it may happen that the government may actually look at these aspects, or corporates may come up with something where they try to understand or try to link what PF is going in your account using UAN, although it's a personal information, but you never know in India. So don't take that kind of a risk. It should not happen that today you are a consultant, tomorrow you become a director, and suddenly some law is changed, and all your employers and every company in future finds out that you were getting PF from three different companies at the same time. That would be end of your career, right? So that's my advice.
Thank you, thank you, Shekhar. So, Nitin, would you like to touch upon the areas, if somebody wanted to take a dual employment legally? What are those few points which he or she should take care of?
Devyani, here I would say legally dual employment, always has been a question, right? But yes, I mean this is something where three parameters comes in. One is all about the engagement of the resource. The second, occupancy level of the individual, and third is greed. Okay, so I would more emphasize on first 2 points, where I would be talking about the engagement of the resource as well as the occupancy level. So I mean, when they are working from home, it is our responsibility to engage them properly, right? If obviously certain rules and regulations are there, where everyone is supposed to abide with it, but at the same time, being a manager, I have to demonstrate a kind of practice where my resource feels that they have been completely packed for the day, their skills has been utilized at the optimum level, right? They are not getting even a single of seconds to thought about that, I have to do this extra work. One. Second, if I say assessment of the greed, right? Obviously, I mean, this is something, neither it is in my control, not anyone controls, right? Because expectation is one thing which always employer like to work upon and see, up to what extent it is possible or not possible. But if this has been converted into greed, probably no one can stop this, right? And this is where this unethical practices comes in pictures and keep bothering everyone. So that's my take on this, Devyani.
Thank you,
But
Nitin.
let me add. So, sorry,
Yeah,
Devyani. I
please go
just want
ahead.
to
Yeah.
add
Go
for
ahead.
the benefit of the panel, because you see these things are not normally covered in most of the conversations. When you say multiple employment, do not look at only getting salaries from two different companies. You see, there you have to look at other aspects. So, to take an
Engagement.
example of this conference, there are some conferences where you may benefit monetarily. So it is not an employment, but you should make sure that your company has a, every company would have an ethics committee or an ethics function. Make sure that you're aware of those policies around even participating in conferences as leaders or as speakers or as presenters. Even that falls in the purview of multiple employment. Freelancing, for example, some companies will not even allow as a policy to do any freelance work. One more aspect to it is, so in my case, I'm also a director of one of the NGOs. Now that's not a position from which I benefit monetarily. But again, this was declared very clearly when I before I joined. I made sure I got all the approvals from the organization I was working for. And when I switched jobs, I again made sure that the organization that I joined when I joined Fidelity, I made sure that they did not have an objection to this. So it is not just getting two salaries. The aspect is quite wider. So whenever you do such a thing, make sure that your company policy is, if there is a company policy, you follow it, and exceptions can be made. Nobody stops you from going to HR or your manager or your BU head and saying, is it okay to do it if in absence of a policy or even in presence of a policy? Don't feel afraid to ask. Most of the times, organizations will accommodate.
Thank you, Shekhar.
One thing I would like, yeah,
Yes, please
Devyani.
go ahead,
One thing I
Nitin.
would like to add upon, and I mean, I'm just going to reiterate it because in start of this discussion, Devyani, use one word, say mutual respect. So I think, because mutual respect has been one of the part of this ethical practices, and this is where if we have that respect, obviously this dual employment does not come in the picture, right? Because this mutual respects always ask us to take the ownership and to forecast all those goals and the visions which we have for the organization. So I think if it is there, then this dual employment will not persist. But again, greed is something which very hard to control.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Nitin.
but
And
one line in one line, my suggestion is ask and do rather than do and ask.
correct, correct. So you should be aware of what your company follows, what your principal employer follows, and you should be aware and do not hesitate to ask before going for anything which may come under the purview of a dual employment. Now, moving ahead, so from employment, once the person is employed in the organization, and few of the organization do follow a background verification check prior to joining, and some organization do follow after joining. So taking a cue from an organization who follow it after joining, again, often we see documents where there is a mismatch during background verification, right? So the documents which has been submitted and the documents and the what the CV says and what the employee says. So there are three versions of one particular document. What is your view? And when it goes to any of the third party for a verification, probably the fourth version comes into picture. So, what are your views on this, Shekhar and Nitin, and also your piece of suggestion so that this disparities can be minimized to a greater extent? Over to you, Shekhar.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, no, background verification is actually quite critical, and we have to make sure that any new person coming in, the information they provide is correct. That's the start of your journey with me, right? If I hire you, so if you can't be trustful or truthful on your CV, then I have no reason to trust you in the long run, and that's the whole reason. At the same time, I require a certain skill set and I require a certain experience range. If you are fudging that information on your CV, I don't think you'll be able to perform to my expectation, and then in the long run, nobody is going to benefit from such a relationship. So it is important to have the right information on the CV, and it is not only the information about your education, information about your work experience. It goes a lot further. Sometimes the CV may not contain the information, but when you are actually joining, you sign the appointment letter. That will have a lot more in terms of the terms and conditions and the rules or facts that you're signing on, which may include criminal behavior in the past, or some police report, or other legal aspects which are not really covered in the CV or the interview part. Some fraud in the past, or let's say joining a bank, they may even consider your CIBIL rating. You never know. So when you sign one part of the truthfulness is your CV. The other part is when you sign the appointment letter. Please make sure that you read it. In the end, when something goes wrong in background verification, we find out something. There'll be no excuse that you'll be able to provide. So to give you an example, I'm aware of cases. I've been on some panels in my previous organization where employees would say they worked for some startup which is now shut down, and so it's impossible to verify whether the company existed or not. It may have been a small 200 employee company. And when the background verification in such cases fail, the next logical thing to ask is, fine, you were employed. We're not able to verify physically whether the company existed or not, but you were paid and you would have got the salary slip. And if we can't trust the salary slip, you would have got the salary in your account. So we will also ask you to provide your account statement in that case. And many a times I've seen that people, it's not difficult to make a salary slip, but it is very difficult to make a bank statement. So when you can't provide that, eventually you'll be terminated. I mean, there is no other way. So do not do that. That is my advice. Be very truthful in what you are providing as your information, because that's the start of your journey. If we can't trust you on day one, we can't trust you on after 10 years.
And it's a very I mean you are not looking far sighted in terms of when you're doing such things, because you are not there in the organization for a month, 2 months, 6 months, right? And once you do that, it's a kind of once you're terminated, or even if it is a mutual resignation in the next organization, it is very difficult to justify that why and what happened. So thank you, Shekhar, for this insightful thoughts. I am moving to my next question. That is, we all are aware that we are. Yes,
Devyani,
Nitin, you would like to add
yeah,
upon something?
I would like to add up, one more point, because Shekhar has nicely covered it. Like he mentioned, you can work on the salary slip, but it's very hard to work on the bank statement. So impersonation is one of the case. Although all this documents has been genuine, right? but what if the person who has given the interview is different and the person who joined the organization is different, right? And I hope in last 1.5 year, you have been in the industry, have seen so many of cases, and even there have been lot many places which has been completely banned, right? Because see, this is very unethical practices which now has been running in the market, right? Where where even I would say they have been trained on certain skills, and there are different budgets. Like if you get this much of amount, they will give you the appointment letter. If you give say this much of amount, they will give you appointment letter as well as salary slip and the training. If you provide them certain extra perks, then they will start crediting these amounts in your banks also. So this way you are all set with the papers which you have to produce in the organization. Now, to avoid these practices, because recently there has been more than 3 cases which I personally instigated, and I was shocked. I mean, in first two investigation I did not get the consent, but in third investigation when it started, and I said okay, no problem, but if you are really not ready to agree on this, that these two people were different, then I'm going to show you the video. Then lastly they admitted, no, no, sorry Nitin, please don't take any actions against us, and yes, this is what fudge we did. So I think, I mean, when we are talking about this ethical practices, impersonation is also one of the core area, I would say, where everyone should focus, and they should try to avoid it. I mean, like Shekhar nicely mentioned, it is not your resume which speaks, it is your experience which has to be there on the floor after your joining, right? Maybe you can accommodate for next 3 months, but what after 3 months, when after giving certain trainings you are supposed to be productive in the organization, then obviously these all points will come in the picture, and there you have to take some forceful decisions. So I think that everyone should avoid and should produce what they have and what they are. Over to
Thank
you,
you,
Nitin.
Nitin.
Just to add,
Thank you. Yeah,
sorry
please.
to add in very briefly. I think the part about impersonification, by and large, we should have addressed it by now. So of course now we do interviews on a VC, and we make sure that the person holds the
Yes,
Aadhaar card, and right. So I think that's very
Correct.
easy to validate. I don't think that should be happening anymore. On, yeah, you're right on the front that some companies or some vendors get indulged in malpractices where they'll send a
yes,
person and I think that's our mistake as a hiring manager, because we ask the same set of questions and they go back and ask the previous 10 people what are the questions, and they prepare the next 10 with the same questions. So I think the hiring manager has to be a little smarter in understanding what is going on, and you need to keep tweaking. I think one way this can be addressed is that you should not allow any band to take the interview. You have to identify who is the right person to be an interviewer. Normally, I've seen that people will just push off this responsibility to anybody in the team with experience. Interviewing is not is a skill. It's not. It does not come with experience. It comes with a certain mindset, training, and
yes,
experience. Interview. You have to actually be experienced in interviewing.
Yes,
You
Shekhar,
can't ask
you
anybody
have
in your team.
Yes, Shekhar, you have touched a very important point, and the point which is covered by you and Nitin has already taken care of my next question, where I was about to ask that in this 2 years of pandemic, what do you suggest few of the practices we should advise employees to avoid? So we already touched upon that, and this fraud and malpractices which are there, which is happening in the industry, these are all for short term, and once you land up into it, it will be very difficult for you to come out of it. So it's a suggestion that do not get into it. You get yourself skilled, gain the knowledge, and appear. An organization do understand that. They have, many of the organization have reduced their reappearing time frame, which used to be 1 year, now it is 6 months. In few of the organization it has even become 3 months. So please be open for all that. Appear, reappear, but do not get into those kind of practices. This is what we suggest. Going to my
No,
next
one
question,
more
and
point.
yeah,
Sorry, Devyani. One more point to add here.
yes, please.
See, it is absolutely fair. You apply for the position where you have the skill set, join the organization, acquire new skills while you're working with your existing skills. If you join any big organization, I can't vouch for startups, etc., but the established companies, they are now investing so much in your learning, in your talent. The ocean is your world. I mean, you could
Absolutely,
be
absolutely.
reskilling in whatever you want.
True.
Correct, correct, absolutely, Shekhar. So, moving to the next question, now we let's touch upon the other side of the employment, which is the employer side. Generally, a decent employers, they practice good practices in the industry. Still, we do see some of not so good practices which are there sometimes with the organization, which can be avoided. I would request Nitin to share his views, followed by Shekhar.
Yeah, definitely. See, when we start this discussion, one example I highlighted, person being in the organization from past 3 years now have been questioned why is not performing, right? So when this problem came to my table, I said, okay, let's do some brainstorming, and I asked manager and the employee to sit together. I just in front of each other, I simply said, okay, you tell me expectations of each other, because for me it's very hard to understand after getting two handsome appraisal. Now this performance issues has been in the picture, where one statement was like he has not been able to perform even what he was performing 2 years back, right? So when I asked to share the expectation which employee has from his manager and what expectation manager has from the respective employee, you won't believe, Devyani, the gap was there only. So I would only say, irrespective of thing, there is no harm to talk to your team or to talk to your managers, sit with them, try to figure out the expectation, because if I am not aware about the expectation of Sekhar and Devyani, how would I able to deliver it? Or even if they have not been aware about my pain area, how would I expect that they are going to train me on certain skills which will help me to perform better in my job? So I think this is one point where I would say setting expectation is a different part, but knowing expectation is very very important, very very important.
Also, to give
And
transparency.
exactly, and it's not only about between managers and the subordinate, it is even within the team also, because certain times we have seen some clashes in the team, right? So that only arise when we are not clear about the expectations. So expectations is something which should always be transparent, and no one has to wait for it, everyone has to voluntarily gather it, and even if it is
Absolutely,
not.
Nitin.
Yeah, Shekhar.
And just to add on to this, before
Yeah,
I go to Shekhar, that even if it is, even the area is gray, it is not black and white. That also need to be, that expectation also need to be clearly
true,
communicated to the employee.
true,
Right,
true.
right. Over to you, Shekhar.
Yeah, so let me address what Nitin mentioned first, and then I'll move on to my larger point. See, again, I think people make a mistake. You can have line management to, let's say, an assistant manager or to a manager, but when it comes to goal setting, that must be done by a person who knows what the HR expectation is, what the HR model of goal setting is. Your line management would mostly be for transactions, leaves approval or getting other things done, what timesheet approval and so on and so forth, or managing the operations. The expectation setting is in terms of the goals. If you are as an employee not clear what your manager is saying, please feel free to go to the manager's manager and say that I don't understand what is expected out of me. One thing I've noticed, and I don't know what the reason is, people are very scared to go to higher levels. I don't know why you guys do it, but I've worked with VPs and senior VPs. They're people like us. They're more than happy if somebody approaches them with some issue. And it is not that you're complaining about your manager. It's not always an escalation. Sometimes it requires, for your own career's sake, that if you don't understand something, you do a skip level. Ideally, your manager's manager should also be doing a skip level, but that does not always happen. If you are in a situation where you're not very clear, please feel free to talk to your manager's manager. I
Correct.
don't think anybody will mind. I mean, you can think of a scenario that the manager may feel very threatened, but then it is your career versus the manager's career. You decide what is more important, right?
Absolutely.
Then to my larger point, to my larger point on this, the unethical behavior is at an organization level, and it is then at a people level. So organizations could be corrupt. They could be, uh, allowing practices like bribing in some countries wherever it is required to get business. In my opinion, that should never be done. Most large organizations don't do it, but we know there are Indian companies which always get the government contracts, and we know how that happens. So that's an example of an unethical employer practice. It does not impact you directly today, but eventually, when the ball falls, everybody will get affected. Then the second part is the your boss or your boss's boss or your BU head and people of the organization. You see, we are all people. You'll find all kind of cases: sexual harassment, bad behavior, favoritism, bias, a female manager allowing more leaves to a female employee. All those kind of things happen. Again, uh, if this has to be addressed, and if you are one of the recipients of such things, please make sure that you are documenting all this, and at some point reach out to your manager, reach out to HR. I can also tell you of an instance where the country head was so powerful that the HR of that country was constantly getting complaints of sexual harassment from this country head, from female employees, and nobody bothered to do anything about it because the country head was all powerful. So when I joined that organization, and I am not the kind of person who takes all this nonsense, so I had to actually reach out to the global HR. So when such thing happen, you must also understand what is the hierarchy of your organization. The
Yes.
if it's a 200 people company and the CEO is all powerful, I'm sorry, nothing can be done. Quit. But if it's a large organization which has policies around such things, please make sure you understand the policy and reach or use every channel available, right till the level of your CEO.
Yes, Shekhar. So very well said. And an employee should understand that, as you very categorically said, that why we don't understand why they feel scared to reach up in the hierarchy. That's a very important thing. They are human being like us. Okay, so I'm moving to the next question due to the paucity of time. We have very less time left. I am just rushing a bit. So during notice period, we often see request for notice period waivers, right? And this is mostly we see from employee side, and that is the time when we see that what the communication which is coming from the employer side and what is documented are sometimes different. What is your take on that? I request the panel to take this up.
I think the notice period which is in the policy is quite clear, and there are of course exceptions also mentioned that in case of a 10-day waiver, 15-day waiver, you can get the BU head approval or the HR head approval. I think the problem arises, and especially now, because the churn is so high that companies do not want to even let go of 15 days of the 3-month notice period. It's all money in the end. It's all billability and loss of that 15 days of productivity. So I understand the organization's point of view, but at the same time, they should allow some exceptions. So in my case, I was off. If I was to join Fidelity by a certain date, there was a huge joining bonus. And when I say huge, I mean huge. But my previous employer changed the policy at the last minute. So it was 16 days were left, and the policy clearly said that you can get all the approvals, and in 15 you can get a waiver for 15 days. And I got that waiver 2 months in advance, not like 20 days in advance.
On the last day.
But
Yeah.
yeah, at the last day they changed the policy the day I was to leave. So that those kind of things then do not want to make you go back to the organization. So I think from the organization point of view, they should understand what exceptions can be made and should be made.
And the most important thing which I feel is employees should be very clear and do not overcommit, should not overcommit. That's
Yeah,
also an
but in my
important thing.
correct,
Yeah,
correct,
yeah,
correct. You should not say it will happen. You should decide, ask and do, not do and ask. And the
correct,
ethics come into the picture when the company agrees and then withdraws the agreement.
correct, correct.
I
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
think, yeah, I think except exception, we should go with what is, it is documented in the appointment letter, and everyone should be abide with that only, because irrespective of the notice period has been, nicely necessary, assessed in the organization, and then it has been kept. Exceptions will always be there, right? But
No, no,
again, like
I don't
Shekhar,
agree. I'm sorry, I don't agree. Sometimes the offer letter will say 2 months, or the appointment say 2 months of notice, but then you stay there for 10 years. The policy may change while you're employed and say now it is 90 days.
no, no,
So
no.
in any
Again,
case,
again. See, no,
in
no.
any
Again,
case,
again, again. Yeah, here. I'll just answer to Shekhar questions. See, appointment letter is given when you are joining the organization, and whenever there is any amendment in the policy, you have been, circulated one circular which is referring to your appointment letter only, right? So organization has the complete right to change the policy anytime, but whenever they would be changing the policy, they will be informing you,
communication.
intimating you, and that you have to abide with that.
Correct,
No,
correct.
I agree, I
Absolutely.
agree. What I
So,
agree. Sorry.
as we are running short of time, I will just put my last question, and we will close after that. What do you think? How ethical practices work for long run, and what are benefits we can get out of those ethical practices, both from employer as well as employee side?
Yeah, so I'll very briefly close this with my final comments. So from the employee side, please keep in mind there is a personal satisfaction in doing what is right. Right? Not, you may embezzle 100,000 or 1 lakh, 2 lakhs today, but so, okay, if you have some conscience, you'll not feel good about it, right? So the employee should do the right thing because, well, it's your own personal satisfaction, it's your own morals. You have to look at your own face in the mirror. From the organization's point of view, they are accountable to not just the employees, they're also accountable to their customers, accountable to their stakeholders, they're accountable to their shareholders. So obviously, in case they're also accountable to the law of the land, right? So if they are doing something unethical, eventually, something will go wrong. Karma will always catch up with you, and well, you know of cases where people are now in jail. So the Unitech guys and Amrapali guys, you
Right.
you be unethical and fine. That's where you land.
Yes, Nitin.
Yeah, being, I would only say, being an ethical organization, you always gain, attraction of the employees, reputation, culture, and I would say this always, boost the morale of the employee inside the organization. So that's my take on this.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Shekhar. Thanks, Nitin. Nupur, do we have time to take up the questions, or you can send the questions later to us?
So we have 2 minutes, Devyani. Probably you can cover one question out there.
Okay, so I will take up the first question, which is how about adventuring about introducing in employees to periodically undertake self SWOT analysis? There are organizations who follows this. So I mean, it's a good suggestion. We can put it in our notes. Second is how management would react if employee reveal multiple employment. I would like the panel to take it. How management will react if the employee reveal multiple employment?
I'll refer to HR.
See, again, here, Shekhar, I would say, if there is multiple employment, one side, we would be appreciating, his honesty that the employee is revealing it. But the other side, since everyone has to abide with the policies, the action has to be there, so that this could be an example for the organization not to repeat this.
I think we should follow the guidelines, plain and simple, if somebody need to reveal the
Exactly,
dual employment,
exactly,
and that will help
exactly,
us, right? I'm
exactly.
taking up the last question and maybe close after that. I mean utilizing time purposefully. Do we consider freelancing as an employment? I think Shekhar has already touched upon it, but still I look back to Shekhar to answer this question. Do we consider
Again,
freelancing as an
yeah,
employment?
it depends. Some companies allow it, some companies don't allow it, but the policies are not, generally they are very clear. When they say you should not be earning money from any other, you see, it is not just freelancing for money. You have to understand that when you're doing some training for as a freelancer, you're most likely going to refer to the what is happening in your current organization, and you might end up revealing information which you should not be. And that is the reason why companies normally say you will not get into freelancing. It is not for not allowing you to earn that 10,000 rupees a day. It is to safeguard their interest and their proprietary information, which as a trainer you might end up revealing, or as a coder you might end up using their proprietary code, right? So again, please go through the policy. If you don't find a policy, ask HR. The company has no problem if you make more money, but the company will definitely have a problem if you are using their proprietary information.
Right, right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Shekhar. Thank you, Nitin. Nupur, over to you.
Thank you so much, Devyani.
Thank you so much, Devyani, for wonderfully facilitating this discussion. And thank you, Nitin and Chanda. All three of you have brought some amazing insight on the topic of employee-employer relationship and how it can evolve over time and with the current situation we have been in last 2 years, whatever we have seen and experienced. So thank you very much out there.